Chris, let's go to you. Let's talk about running backs now. Transition into that. Breece Hall. Most people have him. I feel like, I guess it's kind of a similar question. I feel like the Josh Allen thing, I'm picking on you a little bit, but most people have him in the top 3. You got him at 8. What's up? What's the matter?
Yeah, so I know that, Breece Hall is a guy that everybody's super hot on. Look, I love Breece Hall. I was one of the guys I was definitely higher on most people coming out of the draft. But I also saw a guy who benefited a lot from that atrocious offense, who basically they checked the ball to him or they threw it to Wilson. They threw it to him predominantly out of the backfield towards the end of the season. I know Aaron Rodgers will check the ball down, but I think that we're going to have a little bit more weapons. Mike Williams might play 5 games, so he at least gets some targets during those 5 games before he gets hurt again. I think Malachi Corley will be a guy they kind of involve in as using that Randall Cobb role, running the screens, try to get him involved. So I think Aaron Rodgers in general is going to be the kind of feature part of this offense. I alluded to before, Aaron Rodgers is the play call in a lot of ways, but what is Aaron Rodgers going to do in the red zone? He's going to throw the ball. What's he going to do most of the time? He's going to throw the ball. I know they're going to run, but I think Breece Hall really benefited a lot from the ability of being involved in that passing attack. You didn't see a lot of touchdowns. You didn't see a whole lot of ridiculous amounts of yards. What you saw was a guy who had big plays here and there, both the passing game and the running game. I think it's hard to sustain. And as a guy who can be a top 5 or top 3, especially, I want a guy who week in, week out, I can guarantee he's going to be money in the bank for me. A lot of questions with his offense in general, so I'm not willing to spend that draft capital on Breece Hall.
Interesting, because when I look at Breece Hall, I see, well, if Aaron Rodgers is able to play, this offense should therefore be better. Therefore, those touchdowns should increase. I'm with you on, I don't see him getting the same targets that we saw him get last year. He had 95 targets last season. I don't know if he's going to quite get to that number because it was literally either throw it to Garrett Wilson or check the ball down to Breece Hall. There's going to be a little more variance now with Aaron Rodgers. Hopefully he's playing a quarterback, I would think, with Malachi Corley and Mike Williams and Tyler Conklin. Like, it might get actually spread out a little bit. But I don't think that matters when you're talking about a guy who busts big plays all the time and will have more scoring opportunities and is a workhorse. I mean, he's one of the few workhorses left.
Well, let me ask you a quick question, Dan. Do you think they drafted 2 running backs for no reason to sit the bench? I think that part of the reason they drafted 2 smash mouth guys is the guys have some kind, utilized in that red zone, utilized inside that 20, has some guys who can get those short yardage runs. So I think they're going to rotate some of those dudes in a little bit as well.
They had like 5 guys on the depth chart last year. No one saw the field as long as Breece Hall was ready to go. And
one was 95 and Dalvin Cook, though. So let's be real.
Well, that was part of it. But Bonnie Conda never got on the field. They moved on from Cook pretty quickly. So I don't know.
How might make the team this year, but yeah.
Regardless, semantics. Breece Hall is an RB1. Anyway, this is actually to get into this. Since Chris is feeling all testy anyway, we got him and Chase in a showdown with Raheem Mostert right now. Joe is going to be the judge on who wins this debate. So, Raheem Mostert, Chris, you got him at RB13. Chase, you got him all the way down at RB31. Chase, you go first.
Well, okay, listen. I'm not down on Raheem Mostert in terms of like, do I still think the guy can play football? Yeah, but he's 75 years old. Okay, I'm never going to bet on an aging running back when there's younger, better options on his roster behind him. Listen, we talked about a little bit before. Joe mentioned the touchdown spike for Josh Allen rushing touchdowns. You want to talk about a touchdown spike? Raheem Mostert had 18 rushing touchdowns last season. He had never had more than 8 in a season in his life. He more than doubled his career rushing touchdown total in one flipping season. Okay, now his receiving totals weren't all that out of the ordinary for him. He didn't even have he only had his 3rd highest receiving yardage total in his career. So it's not like that was the outlier. His usage was way higher than he's ever had before. Okay. It was the first time in his career he's had over 200 rushing attempts. He had 1,000-yard season. I still think all of that might be in line for him, but he's not going to score 18 touchdowns again on the ground. His previous career high was 8. Okay. If he even hits his previous career high this season, you're talking about a 10 touchdown regression. You want to take away about 70 points from him from last season. You know where that puts him? a high-end RB3, low-end RB2, high-end RB3. I've got him ranked at 31. I've got him ranked as a mid RB3. I don't think that's all that out of the question. I think that you have to expect some kind of regression. The guy's not going to score 18 rushing touchdowns again. We've heard some reports here in the news lately that they actually want to give HN a higher role. I'm not one of these that's going to go out and jump on Jalen Wright right away. I think drafting Jalen Wright at all in redraft this year is overdrafting him, to be dead honest, unless you take him with your 18th round pick and just stash him. But, listen, HN there, Mostert with a gigantic outlier touchdown spike last season, outlier season period, rushing wise for him. I just don't see that as sustainable. So I'm not willing to take a bet on him repeating a running back 5 output, even in that offense that I talked about earlier with Tua, that I love all the weapons. There's all those weapons there. They aren't going to need him to do that. He's not scoring 18 touchdowns on the ground again. Book that if you want to talk about player props later.
Well, so Chase, I agree with you. I agree he's not going to score 18 touchdowns. That's why I don't have him RB3 or RB4 or RB5. I have him RB13. And if you have him scoring half those amount of touchdowns, say 10, how many people scored 10 touchdowns last season rushing? So if we're going to look at numbers, we looked at Raheem Mostert and his potential in this offense. Is this a guy who's going to be utilized? Now, I understand he's older, but it's also a guy who has very low mileage on those legs. They didn't play at mostly until he was about 27, 28 years old in the pros. Mm-hmm. His most carries, he's like you said, was last year, and he was healthy for the most part last year. So if he doesn't get injured and he's healthy, and he showed you he could do that last year, and continue to be involved as that second or third running back. And while I agree Achane is going to be more involved, and you're going to see some other guys in right as well, we saw the guys get rotated in last year, and we still see Raheem Mostert have 18 touchdowns and 20 total. So one thing I saw was a guy who was a red zone machine, whether it was throwing the ball to him, whether it was handing the ball to them, they utilized him. And they also figure out ways to get you big plays with the running backs. So you don't necessarily have to have 20, 25 touches in that offense to be effective. So I'm looking for a guy who's a solid RB2, high RB2 option, I think. So that's where I'm with, I agree. We're not going to get last year, but I'll take a half of last year and still figure out and get a top 15 running back.
All right, Joe. So tell me, who do you think wins this debate?
Well, here's the boring part. I have him ranked at 23. So I am right in between both of you guys, because I am the voice of reason on this podcast. They're both right in their points, which is the touchdown, obviously, level is not sustainable. This is never happening again. Raheem Mostert's not a guy that stayed healthy. He is 32 years old. But I also believe in a 30-year-old running back named Derrick Henry is going to lead the league in rushing this year. So let's not throw too much shade on the old farts like me, okay? Because we're still available and useful in the space. This is a tough one because Devon Achane is a guy that is so explosive and so fun to watch. 11 touchdowns in 11 games. I mean, the guy is just really one of these things. So I think when you think about the touchdown rate of Achane and the touchdown rate of Mostert, what you're really gleaning from this is the Dolphins offense is fast. The Dolphins offense is efficient. The Dolphins offense is going to put points on the board. So having share of it where it makes sense is fine. I would say if you can get him Mostert closer to RB30, then it's an okay draft pick.
Yeah.
You have to take him at anything higher than where I have him in the top 20. I think there's just too much negative space there. So I think that is at the end of the day where I come in. It's not that there's a right or wrong here, because none of us would have been right, because if you told us Mostert was having the season last year, we'd all say that you were drunk or high or both at the same time. So I think this year with Mostert, it's not trying to chase last year, but at the same point in time, if he stays healthy enough, again, somehow by the grace of God, to be useful in this offense, he is going to put up some fantasy points in certain weeks. At the end of the day, it's the Dolphins offense. It's neither of these running backs necessarily. And then you got the young kid coming in there too, who could be interesting at the last 6 weeks of the season, or if there's other injuries. And it's not like Achane's frame is one that we all feel great about holding up. And most of history is a hot mess. So to me, probably shares of guys that I'd be shocked if I had a lot of shares of either. But I will play some props on Achane. I will look at I ladder bet Achane in that one game where he had a gazillion yards and it was the greatest thing ever with all the touchdowns.
Nice.
I was so happy. We talked about it on the show. We had a big social short about it. It was everywhere. We got so much Twitter action on it afterwards. People were so happy that they trailed that bet. But that's the best way to invest in Achane, unfortunately, I think, as opposed to in fantasy.
Well, I agree because he's a best ball player. Speaking of Achane, Adam, you got him right where I have him at 19. Joe just kind of talked about it. Maybe not having a lot of shares because ADP wise, he's going as an RB9. Now, some of that's based on the best ball. We'll see if that changes as we will get closer to the season. I don't think it's going to because so many people are so hyped up over the video game like numbers that they saw, and for good reason. But Joe, you kind of laid it out there too. You're going to tell me this guy's really going to stay healthy for an entire season? I don't see it happening. You're really going to tell me this guy's going to maintain his 7.7, 7 yards per carry? Like these are things I just don't think are possible to maintain at that level over an entirety of a season. But Adam, how are you seeing this, man?
Yeah, I mean, pretty similarly. You need to maintain like at least a 6 for this whole thing to work. To him to return on a 9, because I think it would be absolutely insane to give him more than like 12 touches a game. Like with the running backs you have on that roster, with his frame, like the whole thing, I can't see him getting more than that. So you really do need to be him to be like remarkably efficient. And look, I think he's a good receiver out of the backfield. I don't question that part of it, but I do think Mostert's going to continue to get the goal line work. And if Mostert goes down, I think he would get leapfrogged by a Jalen Wright, to be honest with you, in that specific category at the very least. So I just think on a week-to-week basis, it's going to be hard to trust. I don't think the consistency is going to be there. If you told me he returned at like 14, I would believe you. I don't think that's insane. But what I would expect if you told me that was that there were weeks where he scored 7 points, there were weeks where he scored 35. It's like a Tyler Lockett dilemma from years ago. So that's kind of the way I see it. I just don't think, the gamble's worth it, on his remarkable efficiency. Cause again, that is the only way that I think this thing, pays on the investment. And I've just never seen, that work out. The closest I've seen is Dobbins just coming back time and time again, getting 6 yards per carry for a couple weeks. Oh, and then he's hurt.
And then blown a knee.
Wow. It's like the same thing. So, I don't know.
Yeah, just as your point, I don't see him getting more touches per game. He had 12 last year, roughly about 12 opportunities per game. And I think a lot of people are anticipating that he will get more than that. But I'm with you to go back to the Raheem Mostert thing. They gave him a 2-year, $9 million extension to play him. They did draft in Jalen Wright. We'll see how he works into this thing. So I don't think he's going to get more than 12 opportunities. And when he came back from his injury in the second half of the season, he was RB19 on a points per game basis from that point on. So that's kind of where I have him ranked at 19. I think you're talking about a guy who's going to be, to your point, a boomer bust RB2, not somebody I want to draft as my RB1 unless I'm able to get him, I'm going 0 RB and he was able to fall the 3rd, 4th round, which just isn't happening right now. He's going in the 2nd round. So that's kind of where I fall on this whole thing. Let's shift gears though. Let's go to Buffalo. James Cook. A lot of ways to take this because of what we saw at the end of last season. So James Cook, you're looking at him. What do you think you're going to get out of him? Had the big rush the second half of the year when Joe Brady took over. They decided to go more run first approach, but still was not getting goal line carries during that entire time. So what do you see with James Cook?
Well, the goal line thing, like you had alluded to it earlier, we've got to see. I'm interested to see here in preseason and that how are they going to utilize Ray Davis? Because if James Cook does get any kind of goal line work whatsoever, I mean, you're talking about a guy who's going to score more than 2 touchdowns. You want to talk about touchdown regression. I think a guy that's getting as much work as James Cook is going to score more than 2 touchdowns generally on the ground there. But there's the Ray Davis monkey wrench and things. I kind of lamented about it last year, and I'm kind of lamenting about it this year. We keep seeing all these running backs in the draft go places where they already had running backs. And so we don't get any running back clarity coming out of the draft from most of these teams. We just get more muddied waters in terms of who's going to do what on what team here. I like James Cook. I like his skill set. I like that he doesn't have to come off the field ever. I think that he has more capability as a short yardage runner than I think the popular consensus gives him credit for. But he hasn't had to be that guy, partially because they've got 9'8" Josh Allen running quarterback there and stealing 15 rushing touchdowns last season. I like James Cook. I don't like him super high, but I mean, having him as a mid RB2, I think that's where he's at. And I think that if his touchdown totals increase at all, which I think is pretty likely, like I said, 2 touchdowns with a guy that's getting that many, almost 300 touches a year. I like James Cook. I think I think he can be a good value if you can get him down around there, because he's got the opportunity to return more than that high RB2, maybe on that one line, depending on how this offense, shakes out. I think they're going to have to lean on the run more because of their passing situation with their wide receiver room. So I like James Cook, but we got to see this Ray Davis thing shake out as well.
Yeah, I mean, right now his ADP is RB14. I have him ranked at 17, so just a little bit lower than the ADP for that reason. It was great. Weeks 11 through 18, he was the RB11 on points per game basis during that stretch. I mean, his pace would have been 347 opportunities, over 1,700 total yards. I mean, it would have been insane had he actually had Brady the entire way and they used him as such. So with James Cook, I do think he's an RB2 with or without the touchdowns. That's the good news. If you sprinkle in a little bit extra, then maybe you get a little more upside. There is a situation in New England. Joe, I don't know if you're aware of this, but they signed Antonio Gibson. I don't know why, but when you break down Rhamondre Stevenson and Antonio Gibson, what are you seeing there? Is Stevenson still an RB2 with Gibson there, or we don't have to care?
Hard pass. I just, look, I never let my fandom ever really enter into things, but there's sometimes where the fandom can inform your opinions on stuff. And, I think Belichick signed his death warrant for that job when he started giving Matt Patricia the ability to call plays on offense. Like, I think that was the end of days for Bill. And I love Bill. I love him dearly. He's given me great joy in my life. But the Patriots offense right now is just an enormous conundrum. I can't imagine investing in Stevenson. It's not that I think that I'm afraid of Gibson's presence, but Gibson does fit in that old school Patriots role that they used to love, whether it goes back to the Kevin Falk days of, we like the guys who you could dump off passes to, the James Whites, that role is a real role in the offense. And, Gibson fits that to a large degree more than Stevenson does. Last year I think was very eye-opening because a lot of us thought, oh, they're just going to run the crap out of the football with Stevenson. It just did not work. There's a lot of issues there. I mean, the Patriots offense is towards the bottom. I just put out a new thing in the Black Book this year called the ecosystem, which is expected cumulative offense. And the Patriots are down at the very bottom of it as an offense to avoid. So I'm just not going to invest in this offense, period, because I just think it's one that we don't know who's going to be involved in it, how they're going to be involved in it, or how it's going to run. So those are really good reasons to stay away from it, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. If you can't get the quarterbacks to move the chains and you can't get good offensive minded people running offenses, it's not going to work. Now they have a real offensive coordinator in theory. Let's see how it goes. But again, I think it's really tough to gauge Stevenson's value with Gibson, without Gibson. It doesn't matter. I think it's just a player where you're just better served looking elsewhere.
Yeah, avoiding the Patriots is probably a decent idea. But Chris, I am going to get to you in a second. By the way, the Fantasy Black Book available on Amazon. Make sure you guys go and check that out.
As of last night. That's why I feel so light and breezy this morning. That's why I'm hungover today.
Chris, you do see this a little bit differently because you have him at 17, so you think he should be a mid-level RB2. So why is that?
Well, I was just going to ask the question, does it change your perspective if you guys think there's a role in kind of that there would you kind of assume for these guys, where if you look at one is Nick Chubb and one is Kareem Hunt, which we saw in Cleveland last year, and the usage kind of parallels the two of them. Do you feel more confident about that? And that's where I'm looking at Rhamondre Stevenson. I think that what we saw in Cleveland, now I'm not saying the same off the line or same playmakers are in place, but we saw also Deshaun Watson is a very quarterback starting the beginning of last year. And the quarterback situation was all atrocious for Cleveland most of the year until Joe Flacco came and saved them. But I think what we saw was a team that was able to still establish two, fantasy relevant running backs. You had Nick Chubb, who was one of the top tier guys you could have, and Kareem Hunt just kept falling in the red zone, falling in the end zone, catching a ball here or there, but a guy you found a way to kind of utilize here or there. So for me, I like Stevenson a little bit more because I still think he is the most talented back number one in the backfield by far. So I think Gibson's, a good pass catcher, but I still question his vision and different things along those lines. Stevenson can do a little bit of everything as well. He's not just a running, guy. He can catch the ball as well. So the mixture of the things, young quarterback play, I'm with you. I think Brissett can move the ball a little bit too. He's a decent quarterback. We saw him check the ball down last year as well. So all those different things, I think Rhamondre Stevenson has some value, and people might kind of forget about him. I'm not going to reach for him, but if I can get him a good value, I think he might wind up being a top 20 running back next year.
And can I throw something out real quick? I think the key difference to me between some of those Patriots receiving backs of old and Gibson is like the key tenet to being allowed to be Brady's receiving back is that you have to be a great pass blocker, or not great, but he has to trust you that he's not going to get his legs killed because it's your fault. And I don't know that Gibson is that same level. Like, not that James White was incredible at it or Ware was incredible at it, but Gibson, I mean, the converted wide receiver is not the best pass blocker in the world. So I am curious if, he was signed for that role. That was the vision. I'm certainly not disagreeing there. I think that's absolutely why he's there. But if they get into camp and they're like, maybe we don't trust Jacoby Brissett to die to you, or more importantly, our franchise investment dying to you. And if suddenly Rhamondre, who is a better pass blocker, is all right, well, I'd rather keep the quarterback than worry about running back investment.
And Rhamondre can catch the football too. It's not like he's not capable of that. I mean, May is a little bit, I think, more mobile, to put it kindly, than Tom Brady was. but yeah, that's a really good point that Adam brings up too. Look, the Patriots offense right now, like I said, you could crumple it all up. And I know we're getting wide receivers too. We're going to talk about those guys. Like it is hard to gauge. So why am I trying to invest it in fantasy if I already know it's such a razor thin margin for it to end up being helpful to me?
Yeah, and just to throw this out there, I would say I'm worried about Stevenson from the standpoint of the Patriots went out and signed Antonio Gibson like day one of free agency. Why he was that higher on their priority list, I don't know. But usually when teams do that, it's to utilize a player. However, to Adam's point, it wouldn't be the first time the Patriots sign somebody and decide not to use them. A la Juju Smith-Schuster. So like you go either way here, and depending upon how this goes.